Hi there, it's Carl again. Just want to do a video today on a bit of an update really. It's mid-July in the UK here. So just an update on some of my trees with particular attention, I suppose, really to what's been happening over the last week or so with very, very wet, damp conditions and a lot of wind. So bizarrely, we've gone from sort of the hottest summer on record last year to what's heading for one of the wettest this year, really, with abnormally low temperatures. So what a difference obviously a year can make. So this is Acer red wine, and I think it's good just from time to time to go out and do a little bit of appraisal like this to see how things are getting on. So that's doing really, really well. Kind of happy with that. Very strange cultivar in that it sort of misses bits in the middle and grows at the top, but I kind of like it. It's different. Onto Shishigashira here. Lots of new growth actually there, which is good to see. So really do like this cultivar, as people who watch the panel will know. But that's done really well. As has Shana. I love Shana because the new growth is just such a lovely red colour, and it sort of keeps on growing actually. It retains that kind of nice interest. So it's sort of burgundy dark red in the older growth, but the new growth is a lovely bright red colour, so it sort of reminds you of spring. Once again, with these red cultivars inside, you can see where it's more sheltered. It's kind of green. And here we have Kotonuito. Again, we'll come back to this theme, but if you give these trees some direct sunlight, some really kind of thrive on it, and it does add that extra element to the tree. So here we are mid-July, and we've got some sort of extra colour because of the sunlight, which is lovely. Again, full direct sun nearly all day, a tiny bit of burning on the edges, but nothing really to complain about. I'd say as well, because we've had these sort of overcast wet conditions, I suppose it's quite like Japan really, so many of these trees have really put on a lot of growth. They've done very well. Now from the cover photo, you may have noticed that this Siryu has actually fallen over. Kind of understandable. I mean, it's in a sizable pot, it really is. One of the largest I use, but it still fell over with the wind. Almost don't know how, because it must have blown from the side or whipped round a corner. It's kind of hard to predict really. So we can see new growth. We can see that it's not burnt by the sun, which is absolutely lovely. That's how good Siryu is in direct sunlight. But what I've done around the bottom here, just to show you, is just put it a couple of bricks. I might put one or two more, make an extra layer, just to stop it leaning forwards, because it actually fell away from the house, obviously, as you'll see again from the cover picture. But that, to me, if it fell over once, it's probably going to do it again. So I just think that's a really important message. Don't leave it. I mean, once these things kind of are really quite springy, and they fall and they bounce, and they're really quite happy, I suppose. But why have a problem again when we can do something? So just carrying a little walk. This is my second Sugi, which was about to the top of the pole, which you can see in there at the start of this season. So again, in these very warm, wet but overcast conditions, it's absolutely put on a massive growth spurt. I wonder what to do with this tree, because it is a full-blown tree and would land at many feet tall, and it's not really supposed to be growing in a pot, but it seems to enjoy it as it is, so we'll kind of run with that and perhaps put some lights on it for Christmas. Why not? So here we have my little windbreak setup, I would call it really, because this border was sort of a bit underutilised in my garden, just down here, because of all the wind that blew down through the gap between the houses. And here we've got my bamboo, and I've read this, how this works, but clearly you've got the new growth that's grown at the start of the season and reached a good height, and then that will sort of stay put, and then next year we'll see more new stems at the bottom. So you can just see the sort of yellowy stems of the original there, and some green new stems as well. So that's doing really well and is already serving a great function. I mean, and actually the one next to it here has done even better. It's really getting quite bushy now. So again, you can see when the wind blows, it takes the brunt of it, and that combined with the second Sugi behind and all the other trees really has made an effective windbreak. So I don't worry too much about putting anything down the side here. So just moving on to Twomby's Red Sentinel. You see a you know, very, very modest amount of like sun scorch there perhaps, or whatever, but overall nothing to worry about at all. So that's doing really well, and it's doing what the red sentinels do, which is grow upright. This fella down here, just moving on, Okashimo. Really love this tree, just really small, unusual, curled up leaves, looking really good. And Sazanami next to it, new acquisition. For those that may have seen my other video, I've actually since then repotted this because it was so pot bound in the tree it was at. I felt that it really would warrant a bigger pot, and it's really enjoyed it, so probably made the right decision there. And then we've got the much slower growing varieties next to it, which I've kept in a smaller pot because I don't want to get waterlogged. So with that in mind, I think this is where pot size selection becomes really important, and it's something I've definitely learned over time really. It really doesn't pay you to over pot everything, because in these very, very damp, wet conditions, things can get really quite bogged down. So I'd say this little fella here, Cripsy, is much happier now because I've had it in this pot for a wee while, but because the size of the plant is much more reflective of the size of the tree, then, you know, water absorption's increased, it dries out quicker, and it doesn't get so bogged down. So again, now it's sort of grown into the right pot, but it was probably a fairly dangerous thing to do because of potential issues by overpotting in the first place. So another fella here doing really well, Acers dissected filigree. And again, we'll come back to this theme, but you can see that there's little red tinges to the leaves. I think this is rather similar to kind of a cereotope plant or just a general Acers dissectum. And that morning sun actually does give it some colour, which is lovely. Crimson Queen just really enjoyed itself this year, doing really well. It sort of, again, leapt up, and I'll take responsibility for that. I think it's a question of overpotting. It was in too big a pot to start with, and now the pot size is more equivalent to what the tree needs. It's really thriving on it. Another nice red Acer there, and one of my little favourites, Little Princess down here. It's interesting because this Little Princess has stayed really very small. I don't mind that. I mean, it's sort of cute, kind of appropriate to its name really, but that's lovely. And Firecracker, not put on tremendous growth this year, but just sort of stabilised out very nicely. Lovely red, and actually, considering this is again in an area that doesn't get any sun in the afternoon, has amazingly retained its red colour for the season so far. There's a teeniest bit of green there, to be honest, but the rest of it looks really nice. And again, onto Ryusen, one of the very few weeping red maples, but green maple, sorry. Again, with a little red tinge from the sun, but I think there's probably room in every garden for one of these. And these can be planted in a pot on a wall or something like that, so it just offers something different. And this is very high grafted, so, you know, it's on a very, very long rootstock, comes out the top and then cascades down. But it will actually grow lower than the tree eventually, which is the sort of base of the tree, which is interesting. Makai Yatsubusa, and here we have Jerry Swartz. Now, I've just left this the way it is because I just wanted to show you. Again, it's not a problem for the tree itself. I'm just a bit concerned about the tree underneath it because there's a little tailor. That's what bothers me more. They are durable, they will bounce, but because I've got that kind of size pot and a very large tree on top of it, I don't think that inherently that's particularly wrong, but it does offer a lot of wind, obviously, to has been the wind blowing obviously catches it. It's like sails on top of a ship really. So if I just go and grab that by the actual main tree itself and pop it back up again, and then what I can do when I finish the video is I'll just play around in there and angle the pot better. So if I angle the pot slightly towards the inner side of the fence, I think that'll do okay. And just examining a little tailor here, I think we're okay. He's actually put on a bit of growth, which is lovely. So this is a really finicky one, and it really does enjoy lots of shade, so hence it's in amongst the rest of them. Actually, the new growth is a lusher green colour, which is absolutely fine against the thick older growth. Then we've got Katsura, which again has put on a little bit of growth here. This is one in another video I did mention, though it's not like too much sun, but lovely little leaves, nice little tree. And then by who? Now this is an interesting one because I think this looks super. So I did a sort of series of 3 little videos on sort of red, green and blue Acers, and this has got sort of everything in one, to be honest with you. So again, the more shaded leaves are green, obviously yellow stem, and then some coloration on the top. I mean, if you go too far, they'll start to get damaged, as you can see. But overall, the plant's going to be absolutely fine. A bloodgood that seems to kind of outgrow everything pretty much, really. In the ground, that would be an enormous tree by now, even though it's sort of 3 or 4 years old. And then on to going green, which again has sprung up this year. It's particularly like the weather conditions. Sangukaku. And there we got an Irene as well. That's kind of nice, sort of yellowy colour, but it is suffering from some direct sunlight a little bit. As I said, when these trees are more well established, then you'll get away with it, because obviously there's loads and loads of sort of leaves underneath, and the ones on top, I won't remove them, I'll leave them because they will act as some sort of little shading to that, really. Red flamingo. And then we get sort of onto the trees that are in shade, quite deliberately. So Hub's red willow there is doing really nicely. I've staked him up as well, so hopefully we'll get some height on that one. Because I do love these linear lobum kind of leaves, really. I just think it's kind of different. And if you don't want bamboo in the garden or whatever, or you want sort of red bamboo leaves, then bizarrely that can look really good. And a Sakazuki. So again, some nice colours there already. This is the one that is a spectacular red in the winter. It really has grown on quite a lot, to be honest with you. So that one's doing great. And we have Wendy. And then Beniotaki. So I spotted this one. This is this year's acquisition. Loved it because the way the leaves, they're not actually linear lobum. They're not sort of directly like little strap leaf type things, but they're very, very long, thin fingers, if you like. And another relatively new acquisition here, Higashiyama, which has been kind of interesting. I bought this one because it seems to be lots of different trees all in one. So the older growth is kind of variegated in that way, you probably just see there. And then the new is sort of looking different, and it's just quite an interesting little acquisition, really. Straight out Acer dissectum at the back there. Always looks good, this tree. And again, that little bit of sunlight, that's why I've got it this end under the shelter, so it just gets some sun. Looking really good. The paper bark at the back. It does seem to suffer from getting some sort of drying out at the end of the leaves. I mean, that really does, so my fingers feel particularly dry. Again, I think it's more, as you can see with the wind there, the wind action on it. It does flex and bend and whip around a lot. So I think it's drying up the leaf tips there a bit. Again, I don't think it's going to be a major problem, but just something to be aware of. And then we've got a contifolium. Now that's quite interesting because I think you can see the wind has definitely caused that some damage. It's lovely that I've got it, on this little stand, and it looks nice, but it is kind of a bit more aggressive towards it. So there's 1 or 2 areas where the leaves have got sort of torn by the very high winds we've had. So that's probably a prompt for me to just put that in somewhere a bit more sheltered. So without further ado, there we go. A simpler thing as that can make a real difference. Orange stream at the back. And then we come to Ruby Cascade. So I'm always on the lookout for something a bit different, and this is another cascading Japanese maple, really. So on this one, it's really easy to see how high grafted it actually is, all the way to the top. And then you can see the graft point here, where that's where the Ruby Cascade actually starts. So this is Acer palmatum palmatum on a nice big stem, allowing it to then start high and sort of weep down. You can buy low grafted ones of these, or trees like this, and they'll start off low and go even lower. So that would be absolutely ideal to put it in a sort of wall basket. If you imagine that with a pot attached to the wall. I've just bought 2 such things actually. I just need the plants to go in them, and that would weep down, which, who knew a Japanese maple that weeps. And then we come on to Jordan. If you look into the garden centres and stuff like that, this is what tends to have happened by now. So they're lovely, lovely leaves, but by this time in the season, you will get some scorch, some damage to them. So that's always something to be aware of. But of course, underneath, we've got an absolutely loads and loads of foliage, so no problem as such. Just to note as well that hostas are a really nice addition to any Japanese garden. And first season, really very small. This year really come on nicely. So, you know, not a Japanese maple, but very much in keeping. And they kind of fill in the spaces. If you've got pots, they kind of conceal them. So I think that's a really nice thought, maybe. Mano no Sato, if I pronounced that right. Again, this year really enjoyed the weather. So kind of the purplishness of the leaves is fading just a little bit, but it's still there. And behind that, we've got, as you see, one of the newer additions, which is Shinda Shoujo. Now, believe it or not, this was a tiny, tiny little tree, about so high, and then just this season has really grown. But it does seem to like where it is, so that's definitely going to stay put. Lovely red growth. Shinda Shoujo, because Shin means lucky, it's the new Shoujo basically, so that one's doing wonderfully well. And Amiga Shadara, another one, just to have a look at. Again, tricky to grow these, quite finicky, and probably has dried out a little bit, but overall the tree's done pretty well, to be honest with you. So pleased with that. And Ukagumo, again, very white there. The new growth looks as though it's regressing, or you know, it doesn't look the same as the old really. But then following down here, it's lovely pink as well. So extremely nice varied tree. Wilson's Pink Dwarf. So after a really slow start, it's really picked up in terms of growth. As you can see, some little damage here. That's a bit of frost, a bit of drying, a bit of over watering, but it's recovered really nicely. The same really with this little fellow. I'll just get the label there to show you, Aratama. Really nice little plant actually, and I love these with the new red growth. It just is very effective. And then we have Moonrise, which is in pretty much a perfect spot here, I think, because the sun isn't damaging enough to ruin the leaves and burn them, a bit like the Jordan. It is more resistant to the Jordan anyway, actually, but it does give them some interesting coloration, which is just lovely. And it does make a sort of low spreading canopy of leaves, which look really nice. Not forgetting Sharon, that's my wife's name, so that's Acer palmatum Sharon there, which is a nice classic kind of red but slightly green maple as well. And then also Beni Shihenji. Now, or Shishihenji. Do like this plant, and it looks really finicky and it looks really delicate, but it seems to, admittedly that, you know, it gets morning shade here and stuff, but hasn't really suffered at all. And it's just a really interesting tree with variegated leaves and just a lot going on really. So just really to summarize where we're at with the weather, I think the important thing, if you get very high winds, is to sort of stabilize the trees as best you can. For me, using ceramic pots, that has the advantage that when it's wet and windy, the pots will absorb moisture and get even heavier, and they're heavy to start with, so that's going to kind of help stabilize things. I'd certainly advise using the option of some bricks or something to prop the bottom of the plants up if necessary, and do kind of monitor things, because if you've got a plant that's fallen over in the wind and then you have a spell 2 or 3 days later of some really dry weather, there's obviously a real danger of the plant drying out because it's not getting any moisture. So perversely, ones that fall over could be subject to drying out too much really. Also, please bear in mind that all of these plants are on a base, which is pebbles in my case. So if not pebbles, you can always stand them on little pot stands or bricks or whatever you like, because it's really quite important, I think, to make sure they drain off. These have had an awful lot of rain over the last week or so, and there is a drainage hole at the bottom. It is fairly well draining compost, but that water's got to go somewhere. So I think a big mistake is to put the plant, do all the drainage right, but then put it on the ground, and then it's sort of embedded in clay soil or something like that, so you lose your drainage in that kind of way. But just in summary, I'd say this has been a very interesting year. At the start of the season, it was incredibly dull and wet, and some plants suffer from root rot. I think, to be honest, once they've got underway, and at this time of year, that the water falling upon them actually gets deflected to some degree because of the foliage. So if you imagine this red sentinel, there's an awful lot of leaves for the water to bounce off and kind of protect itself, really. Whereas when they're leafless, or when they only just leaf out, there's a much more chance for the plants to get waterlogged. So at the moment, really happy with how things are progressing, I suppose. Again, 1 or 2 learnings about dealing with some weather, and sadly, that if you love going Japanese maples, it seems to be either too wet, too windy, too hot, one or the other, really. But with a little bit of TLC, I think they can do really, really well. And again, when you're potting, when you're choosing compost, etc., you're trying to sort of put a coat on a maple that's going to have to last it through all seasons, I suppose. So, whereas, in 1 year you need something that retains water a little bit more, and 1 year something with better drainage, you kind of have to go for a compromise and manage things accordingly. But all lessons learned, and again, I hope you enjoyed this video, and like and subscribe, that'd be excellent. Channel's growing quite nicely, so it's glad to see that what I'm doing is helping people and they're interested. That's always good to see. And we'll see you soon in the next video.